Hey, everybody, you are tuning in to Canary Cry Radio, and my name's Basil.
And this is Gons. Welcome to what I think is episode 156 of Canary Cry Radio. We have a returning guest, Tim Alberino, with us. Tim is an author, an explorer, a filmmaker with a passion for discovery and truth. He was on Canary Cry Radio back in September of 2015. Episode 98, and I think Tim was on with me on the Face Like the Sun channel more recently, but even still, I think it was like 2016 or 17. It's been a few years, but he's back. Tim, how you doing, buddy?
Nice to be with you, fellas.
Yeah, I can't believe it was 2015 last time we spoke. That's wild.
Different world.
I know.
Oh different world back then. Completely different world. And you've stayed busy pretty much the whole time, huh?
Yeah, I've been very busy over the last couple of years. I've been, I spent an extensive period of time in Peru filming for a new TV show that I'm currently developing, and writing a book.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, busy guy over here, folks. Busy guy. Well, we're glad you could make some time for us. I have been sort of watching developments through your social media and the other works you've been putting out. It's been fun. It's, when I go to conferences or something, be like, oh, yeah, Tim, yeah, we're best buds. Of course we are. But I haven't talked to you in 5 years, so I'm glad I can prove that we know each other again.
Never seen your face though.
Well, see, that's by design, and I don't want to blow up your spot, but of course, especially over on the Face Like the Sun channel, some people are, they get a little upset that they never get to see my face, but I'll go ahead and give it away that. You approve of in our new changing world of the technocracy and the communist insurrection that hiding the face might be a pretty beneficial thing nowadays.
Not a bad idea. The commies are coming, so
watch out.
I literally just yesterday deleted my Twitter account. Because I was so ticked off that they took the president. They basically suspended the president's account, and
crazy.
I was just so sickened by it. I hate social media, so I decided to cut the last thread connecting me to the social media world.
Wow. Do you feel free? Do you feel good?
I do, actually. Paying attention to what's going on right now is too depressing anyway. So.
Right.
I'm just trying to focus in on my little world over here and my big family that I have now, and I think I'm happier for it. So.
Yeah. Good for you, man. One of these days. The problem is I just started using Twitter this year. I was using it because I wanted to try to convince this robot company to let me drive one of their robots. Then I got distracted. So I still feel like I'm new at the Twitter thing. And, it has been long enough. I don't get too much benefit out of it, except for it stresses me out every time I look at it.
Yeah, social media is definitely meant to psychologically affect people's brains.
It's the brainwashing, man. It's the brainwashing.
And also just trigger people to no end with takes from people that, again, as I said in the News Talk segment of today's show, I'm starting to relate to the eugenicists,
Oh, no.
when I see some of these people posting what they post. Or it's they shouldn't be around. No, maybe not. But
watch out. Somebody's gonna clip that.
I know someone's gonna
Gons.
clip it. Oh, Gons is a eugenicist.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about Tim, your new book, Birthright, the Coming Posthuman Apocalypse and the Usurpation of Adam's Dominion on Planet Earth. And I got through most of it, and I gotta say, I messaged you on email this morning, and I was saying, this book, it's like the 101 if you want to dive into the kinds of things that I've been talking about on this channel, the stuff we've been tackling on Canary Cry Radio over the years. This book is almost like the blueprint 101 to get through all that material in 13 chapters. And I even said I'm a little jealous that I didn't write the book, but
That's
I'm
a
glad
good
someone else
compliment.
did.
Or maybe you did, and maybe that's why I'm on your show to announce that.
Oh, yeah.
Birthright,
I did.
written by Gons, ghost written by Tim Alberino.
I didn't see any footnotes with my name, so if I did write it, then it's super top secret. And maybe that's what was going on with all my dreams with you in there.
We'll figure it out in court, okay, boys? We'll figure this out later.
Yeah. But one of the things that I think we can both relate to in a very strange way is you were talking about the very beginning. You mentioned how David Flynn's work had influenced you quite a bit. And, kind of taking the baton from what David Flynn left behind with his work on Cydonia and just all of his writings and research. And, it's weird because I have the same type of feeling with that in some ways, especially because I found out of his passing. He actually passed on my birthday in 2012, which was like the weirdest thing. And the other weird part of it is that his birthday is just a day after my son that was just born. So just weird stuff there. But then you have another, thing about, I didn't realize you're a twin, Tim.
Identical twin. Yes.
You have an identical twin. I did not know this about you, or maybe you mentioned it in the past and I don't remember, but is your twin just as much into all this kind of stuff as you are, or is it?
No. He's a bright guy. He's into philosophy and theology. He's getting his doctorate in philosophy.
Okay.
Shortly, so different track.
Yeah.
But likewise is a very strong believer, and but very different tracks of intellectual pursuit. Let's call it.
Yeah, that would be an interesting debate. Just the differences between the Alberino twins. But yeah, the book, I got through it. Fantastic work. And I wanted to just kind of run through some of the ideas and what caused you to look into all this stuff to begin with. But
Gons, before we get into the specifics, Tim, could I ask you to give us kind of a summarization of the book? What is if you had to lay it out for somebody who had not heard of it before, what are we looking at here?
It's a little bit difficult to encapsulate the content of the book because I have such a wide girth in this book. I cover a lot of territory, beginning with a pre-Adamic paradigm all the way to a post-human paradigm. And the thrust of the book is to explain what I call the purpose and patrimony of the human species and why it is so important for us to remain human, to remember who we are, to remember who we were created to be, and the consequences of losing our humanity, which is going to happen in the future for most of the people living on the planet, and why our humanity is so imperative as it pertains to the unfolding of what's happening at the end of the age. And to do that, to cover that ground, again, I start in a pre-Adamic context because you have to. Yeah. And people who read my book will see why you have to. And then I move through time, and I talk about the Watchers and the Golden Age. But I think I talk about the Watchers in a way that's a little bit different than most people do. I think I have a much more unfiltered take on the Watchers than people are probably familiar with. And I demonstrate that what happened with the Watchers was really a preamble to what's going to happen at the end of the age. It's not exactly the same. It's not going to be an exact copy of the Genesis 6 scenario, the Genesis 6 affair, but it's going to be much along the same lines.
Seems like a meta history of humanity and its relationship to, its little spot in the universe, but that might be a little bit bigger of a spot than some people might think.
Yeah, in the beginning of the book, the very first thing that I do is I try and disabuse people of the idea that mankind is the center of the universe, that we are the center of the cosmos, that the human species is the hub of the wheel, because that is not a biblical view. It's actually quite antithetical to the biblical view, which places Christ at the center of all things. So most people are coming to the Bible. Most Christians are viewing the Bible through a anthropocentric perspective, which means human-centric, rather than the doctrinally correct position, which is a Christocentric paradigm, a Christocentric perspective, which places Christ at the center of all things. In fact, Christ is at the center of the scriptures. Christ is at the center of the universe. He is the purpose of the universe. He is both the source and the purpose of the universe. And so when we remove ourselves, when we take man and when we allow for a biblical worldview in which man is not the hub of the wheel, so to speak, then a lot of these other questions that are uncomfortable within that anthropocentric paradigm are no longer difficult to deal with, such as the possibility of extraterrestrial life. It's really quite inconsequential. When Christ is the center of all things and not us, then it's not that difficult to accept that there's perhaps untold eons of history behind us in a pre-Adamic context. That almost offends our pride. When we have ourselves at the center of the universe, it's very difficult for us to perceive the universe existing without us, and not just without us on a personal level, although that's very difficult, but on a species-wide level. Obviously, for atheists or non-Christians, that's not very difficult at all. That is their worldview, except in their worldview, they don't have Christ at the center. They have ultimately it's a humanistic worldview, and they do have man at the center of the universe. So in one sense, but not in a cosmological sense. So I want to remind people, and this is what I do at the beginning of the book, that the Bible is not an anthropocentric narrative. The biblical narrative is not anthropocentric. It is not human-centered, even though it is a story about human beings. It is Christ-centered. It is Christocentric from cover to cover.
Yeah, I think that's really an important point, because even when I was first saved and I was just kind of catching up on theology, just basic theology, 24 years old, 25 years old, going to just normal church, they were sort of giving me the whole, this is, this book, the Bible, it's about you, it's about me, it's about, and certainly there's a place for us in the continuum, but our humanity is based on Christ. Like, Christ is the one that is the center, and then again, we get to have our humanity through him. And the story that unfolds, that you lay out in your book here, and I think just in the last few years, just prophetically, eschatologically, but also cosmically, we've been able to, I think, piece together everything in a much more coherent way, because a lot of times, even when I first started looking at stuff, it was like, I don't understand what's happening here in the Old Testament. Like, I get the Genesis 6 thing was really compelling when I first looked at it, and the Genesis 3 narrative with the Nakash, it's not a talking snake, it was some other entity, the Michael Heiser kind of stuff with the divine council and all this. It started to make sense and piecing together everything. And then even then, it was more about, again, it was Christ's mission to mankind, that to save mankind because of the situation we're in. And so I think the nuance there that you're pointing out is really important, because people do think that people do the thing where they point to a Bible passage and they allow it to speak to them and stuff. And I think there's a place for that in terms of the Bible being a transparent, or not transparent, but transcendent piece of text that is not just from a physical world, but beyond it, as the author is. But at the same time, you can't really change it. You can't change the words of the Bible. And if you again look into it, I think you're 100% correct that this book is about Christ, and we get to sort of reflect on what our lives are and what we might experience. And I think our generation specifically, and our maybe children's generation, we're in for kind of a treat, if you want to call it that, in being able to see and witness potentially a lot of what had been prophesied and a lot of what may be a culmination of some of what had taken place in the ancient past. So what do you say to that? Do you think our generation, maybe our children's generation, are primed to begin seeing these things unfold?
The short answer is yes. Let me back up for just a moment. The Bible has two primary protagonists. The first protagonist is the Son of God. He is the primary purpose of the Scriptures. That's why Jesus said that when walking with those two men on the road after he had resurrected, and he was showing them all the Scriptures, how all of the Scriptures pertain to him. All of it. Mm-hmm. So he's the primary protagonist of the Scriptures. The secondary protagonist is not Israel. It's not Israel. It's Adam. And because there can be an Adam without an Israel, but there cannot be an Israel without an Adam. Adam is the character that I think most contemporary Christians fail to see when they read the Scriptures. Mm-hmm. And so many contemporary scholars spend so much time focusing on Israel, because it would appear that much of the prophecy revolves around Israel, and that Israel is such an important piece of the puzzle, and it is, in so much as Israel is a reflection of Adam. Because the problem of sin doesn't start in Israel. The problem of mankind does not start in Israel. The promise of the Christ does not start in Israel. It all starts with Adam. Mm-hmm. Adam is the source of all of our problems and all of our promises. Because even the things that were prophesied to Abraham and the patriarchs following Abraham, Israel, pertain not just to Israel, but pertain to Adam. And by Adam, I mean all of us who are the sons and daughters of Adam. And so we have a problem. The human species has a problem. We have, as Christians, again, contemporary Western Christians, we've definitely identified part of our problem. And the part that we got really well because of the Protestant Reformation is we understand our depravity. Mm-hmm. The Reformers helped us understand man's utter depravity and need for redemption. So this is the one point of the gospel that most Protestant churches around the world get really well, the ones that are still faithful to the Scriptures, is human depravity. In other words, sin. We are sinful, and our problem is one of sin. That the heart of man is exceedingly wicked, and this is preached from the pulpits of very good churches, solid churches, and the reason why I make a point to say that is because a lot of churches don't even preach that anymore, because they've abandoned the gospel. So the good churches still preach this, and they're very strong Protestant churches. But that is only part of our problem. And I'm looking forward to the day when Christians begin to awaken to the realization that yes, depravity is a big part of our problem, sin, but it's only part of the problem, because the other side, the other half of our problem is not solved, is not let's say, solved with the word redemption, but the word reconciliation. Because the other part of our problem is that we have been sundered from the family of God. Mm-hmm. That's a big problem for us. Yeah. Most Christians don't know this. They don't understand this. But this is the heart of the gospel. We have been sundered from the family of God. The human species, the sons and daughters of Adam, are divorced from the divine family, from the family of God.
Yeah.
And because we have been sundered, it has led to all kinds of problems for us. And it's part of the sin equation. It's part of the reason why we are sinful and why we are depraved. And this is illustrated, this scenario in which we find ourselves is illustrated beautifully in the parable of the prodigal son, which is what I I end the first chapter with the parable of the prodigal son, because it is a portrait of what has happened in that one parable. The one parable from Christ about the prodigal son encapsulates the gospel from beginning to end. And everybody knows it, the parable of the prodigal son. Most people are familiar with it. Yeah. That you have this son who's in the father's house. There are two siblings in the parable. There's a father who has this, it's apparently a royal house because it's got servants and so forth, and it seems to be a big estate, so it's a large estate. And the father has two sons, two sons. And one of those sons, both of those sons, by the way, are co-inheritors of a birthright, of an inheritance. And one of those sons, the younger son, petitions his father that he will get his inheritance early, that he might receive his inheritance early so he can go out and spend it, basically. So long story short, the father gives him his inheritance, and this younger son, who Jesus calls the prodigal son, goes out and squanders his inheritance. And he spends all of his money living it up in the world, and he ends up impoverished. He ends up becoming indentured to a swineherd. The swineherd is an archetype of Satan, and he ends up eating the slop of pigs. So he's tending these pigs and he's feeding them slop, and he's so hungry and destitute that he eats the slop of pigs. He doesn't have anything else to eat. He is so impoverished. That is the depiction of us. That is fallen man. And so that prodigal son is Adam. Now, let me put a little footnote on this and say that the parable of the prodigal son, as many parables and prophecies do, is speaks to two different things at the same time. It's addressing, there's two different layers to this parable. On the very superficial level, it can pertain to Israel and Judah and Israel, mm-hmm. Who both have an inheritance in Israel, and of course the northern tribes broke away from Judah, and so forth and so on, and so there's certainly an interpretation there. But there is no question, none, that the parable of the prodigal son relates to Adam, and de facto to us, by extension. And so we find the prodigal son in this state of extreme poverty, and he realizes, he recognizes his depravity, and there's the part of the gospel that so many Protestant churches get right, that Martin Luther and Calvin and so forth really returned to the church, was this idea that we are depraved. Whether you be the Pope or a pauper, you are depraved. You are eating the slop of pigs, and we have to recognize our depravity, human depravity, absolutely. And that's the first thing that the prodigal son does, is when before returning to his father's house, he recognizes his own depravity, the depravity of his condition, eating the slop of pigs, indentured to the swineherd, and decides that he's going to return to his father's house with the hope of being received, if only as a lowly as a lowly servant, remembering that the servants in his father's house live much better than he does. So he doesn't think he's going to be received as a son. So at least he's going to beg his father to take him back as a servant. He's blown his inheritance. He's not worthy to be a son anymore. So he decides to return to his father's house, probably expecting his father to be sorely displeased with him. And instead, what happens is, as he's returning home, the father is at the door waiting for him. This is a picture of God's unsearchable grace and loving kindness. He's at the door waiting for his son. And when he sees his son, his prodigal son, who's blown his inheritance, coming from afar off, he runs out to meet him. And his son is probably thinking that he's about to get a scolding from his father and turned away. Instead, he's surprised to find his father embracing him and kissing his neck. And his father then brings him back into the house, puts a robe on him, has him clothed in new clothes, new garments, new sandals on his feet, which is a depiction of the resurrection and the righteousness of Christ. And then the father has a ring put on his finger, which is the seal of his house. And the son is brought back into the family, not as a servant, but as a son, fully instated back into his former estate, in the family, in the father's family. A sibling, remember, in the family, a sibling. And that's not where the story ends, because the older brother is observing all of this take place and is a little bit ticked off because he never left. He never blew his inheritance. Remember, it was a co-inheritance with his brother. He never went out and blew his inheritance. He stayed faithful to the father. He was in the father's house the whole time, and he was upset about it and asked his father, why you never threw me a party, because they ended up throwing the prodigal son killing a fatted calf and throwing him a party and having a great celebration. And so the older brother says, you never did this for me. You never killed a fatted calf for me. And the father's reply is the heart of the gospel. He said to his older son, we're doing this because your younger brother, was lost, but is now found. And so they're celebrating. And this really, even every time I tell this story of the prodigal son, I get chills, because this is the gospel of Christ. Because what happened with the prodigal son is he was brought back into the family of God, where he was created, where he belonged. That's what he was created for. And this is a depiction of Adam being brought back into the family of God, fully restored to his former estate. With the righteousness of Christ, the resurrection, and the ring, the seal of the Father's house being put back on his finger, fully restored. That's called reconciliation. Redemption is the first thing that happens. That's what purchases men for God. Redemption purchases us back to God. Christ died so that to cover our sins, to pay the penalty for our sin. So that was the work of redemption. Redemption happened at the cross, but what's coming next for the believer is reconciliation back into the family of God. And then reconciliation, what happens with reconciliation is restoration. And so this is how I teach my kids the gospel. You have redemption at the cross, so that we're redeemed as believers, we're redeemed so that we might be reconciled back into the family of God, so that we might have all things that were lost in Adam restored to us through Christ. And this is of course what Jesus says to his disciples on the eve of his crucifixion, knowing he's about to be crucified. He tells his disciples that he's going to go away. He's going to have to go away, and where he's going, they can't follow him. And he tells them he's going. Where did he tell them that he was going? To his Father's house. And he's going there to prepare a place for them. And if he's going to prepare a place for them, he would come back to get them and bring them there so that they might be where he is. Where? In the Father's house. So there we know Jesus is evoking the parable of the prodigal son. He's we know, because Jesus is evoking the parable of the prodigal son in this context, we know that the parable of the prodigal son is not just about Israel and Judah. It's about Adam. It's about us being restored back into the family of God, where we belong, where we were created to be, no longer sundered, but restored. And by the way, reconciled. By the way, the word reconciliation, the opposite of the word to be reconciled, reconciliation, is to be at enmity. And that's where the human species is now. Those who don't believe in Christ, those who reject Christ, they're not just divorced from the family of God, they are enemies of God. They are in a state of enmity with God. They are in opposition to him. They're not just divorced from the family. They don't just reject him. They become his enemies, and they are condemned. And they are condemned not by themselves. And this is an important thing that I bring out in this book. Our condemnation is not a unique condemnation for mankind. No. Any of us, any human being who rejects Christ is condemned with his enemies, is condemned with the dragon. And so that condemnation, that the imprisonment, the punishment of hell, was not created for us. It was created before us for the dragon and his angels. And any human being who rejects Christ, the free gift of God, is condemned with his enemies.
Yeah. You know, I actually...
And I'm sorry to be long-winded.
No. That's perfect.
No,
it's so good. It's beautiful, beautiful words. And I resonated so much with your t-shirt, The Human 2.0, being Jesus, because of, many passages. 1 Corinthians 15:47, talking about Adam, the first man, was from the earth, or from dust, and the second man is from heaven, meaning Christ. Mm-hmm. And in Age of Deceit 3, I made the point that rejecting Christ is rejecting your humanity. Because if you're rejecting Christ, you're basically rejecting your humanity, and therefore you're going to end up in the pit with the dragon and his rebel angels. And so it becomes really black and white in terms of destination and your eternal state. But somebody in the chat mentioned, and this is what I was wondering too, in the Prodigal Son story, who is the older brother?
The answer to that is the title of my first chapter, The Elder Race. Ah. And the reason why I call them, of course, I've coined that term in a theological context. It exists in fantasy novels, certainly. Mm-hmm. Maybe some of your listeners will remember Tolkien's Eldar race, which basically was the same concept. And in other words, the word elder obviously means older. So elder, older, it's interchangeable. And then race obviously designates a particular species, a particular kind, like the human race. And so the reason why I designate the older brother as the elder race is because A, he's older. There's no question about that. And B, he constitutes, these beings constitute a race. And of course, I'm talking about angels. And the Bible makes this abundantly clear in many places. We have an inheritance with the angels. Why? Because we are siblings in the family, supposed to be siblings in the family, of course. Mm-hmm. Those of us who believe in Christ are, according to Christ, according to Jesus, are on a trajectory to become the sons of God. We are given the power, Jesus says, to become the sons of God, even like the angels, he says. Mm-hmm. But then he adds this little addendum that most people don't remember. Being sons of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. And so the resurrection is the restoration. It is the fulfillment of our redemption and reconciliation. It is the moment at which all things are restored back to us. All things that were lost in Adam. What is lost in Adam is regained in Christ. And so there's a family, and we were supposed to be part of it. And so was the dragon, but he rebelled. And, there's a lot of talk of insurrection right now in the news. It was an insurrection. Mm-hmm. And I put it in, I frame it as a galactic or a cosmic insurrection. And so the older brother it must be the elder race, who a class of beings that we call angels, although I don't really like the angel designation because it's ambiguous and it doesn't even always refer to non-human beings in the Bible. Sometimes human beings are called angels because it simply means a messenger, an envoy, one who is sent. And so we have this shadowy figure in the biblical narrative. There's like this shadowy portrait of this other person who's there, who we're not told a whole lot about, but who has a co-inheritance with us in the kingdom. And for those who've never heard this, believe me, it is in the text of Scripture.
Yeah,
and I make it clear in my book.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a good place to go, because I saw in the chat, and also I know people struggle with that idea of an elder race or a pre-Adamic race. And it's something that I looked into quite a bit, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, when I started to really kind of piece some things together. And one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of people talk about the gap theory of Genesis 1, but they don't. What I think you did so brilliantly in your book is you don't just take the gap theory idea and just run with that. You tie it into, well, who was there before, and you answered that question, because a lot of people will say, oh yeah, gap theory, there's, the Genesis 1 isn't talking about the ultimate, the beginning of all of creation, although I think it can be talking about that too in some sense, because it says in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth, but it's also referencing something that may have been the beginning of humankind, of mankind, and the formless and void, the tohu and bohu stuff, and finding it in Isaiah, mentioned, the only other time mentioned being after God's judgment, after God's wrath, and things like that. So there's a lot there where you go, oh wow, so there was something there. And I think looking at David Flynn's work was really fascinating, because then you start getting into, and this is going to like trigger flat earthers, which is, I'm fine with that. But like, before all that came around, looking at what the asteroid belt was, potentially this planet that was there called Rahab, and there's scriptures that seem to reference a sort of a place that was destroyed in some kind of ancient cosmic war. Take us down that road, because I know there's a lot there, and you do a pretty good job of tying all that together for people in the book.
Well, let me just address very quickly this notion of a pre-Adamic paradigm.
Yeah.
The pre-Adamic paradigm is presupposed in the scriptures.
Right.
It's not a controversy.
Yeah.
And it's quite undeniable. First of all, the reason why people have a hard time with it is because they're stuck in an anthropocentric perspective. They see mankind as the center, the very purpose of the cosmos. Why was the earth created? Well, in most people would answer, why was the earth created? For man. So in other words, man and the earth and the cosmos all came into creation. All were created together simultaneously. And that's where the story begins. That is definitely not a biblical perspective. And the reason why I say that is because it's quite evident that we are not the first. Remember, we're the younger sibling in the parable of the prodigal son. We're not a twin. It doesn't say there were two twins. It says there were two brothers. There was an older brother and there was a younger brother. We are the younger brother. So there are beings that predate us.
Yep.
And that's a fact. It's a biblical fact. The Bible talks about, in the book of Job, we read about the sons of God shouting for joy as the earth is created, being formed or reformed.
Yeah.
So that automatically, as I said, presupposes a pre-Adamic paradigm. And that's why I really don't understand what the controversy is. Obviously, there are things that happened before man was created. It's not a controversial point of view, and it's not a gap theory. I think it is the natural flow of the biblical narrative, and it makes perfect sense when you understand the story of what's happening, and especially why it is that Adam was created. God does not create a being and then give it a purpose. He creates a being because it has a purpose. In other words, mankind wasn't created and then assigned with a purpose. There was a purpose for which mankind was created. So we came into existence to fulfill a role. And we weren't just created like other creatures out there. We were specifically created. When I say me, of course, I mean Adam. We were specifically created to be a sibling in the family and to have authority, to execute authority, to have dominion of the earth. And that's why, to get to the punchline of the book, dominion of the earth is the birthright of Adam. It is the birthright of Adam. It was given to him, it was bequeathed to him, bestowed to him, endowed to him from the beginning. And it cannot be taken away. It can be lost, it can be usurped, but it cannot be taken away by force. Remember that Paul says that the gifts and the callings and the calling of God are irrevocable. And the gift of dominion of the earth, the endowment of dominion of the earth to Adam is irrevocable. It cannot be stolen. It can be abdicated. And it gets complicated, but I go through all of that in the book.
Yeah,
and I can't remember what the original question was.
Well, I mean, it was you sort of went there because it was basically, just looking at the pre-Adamic race idea, and you answered the question that it's presupposed in the Bible, and I have Job 38 up on the screen there, verses 6 and 7. This is God talking to Job and saying, "Where were you when its foundations, the earth, were laid, when the cornerstones were laid, and when the morning stars and the sons of God shouted for joy?" Which clearly shows that there were these beings, these morning stars, and these beings called sons of God. I don't know if it's the same. Do you consider them the same being, or is it?
Absolutely. I think that the designation morning star is a direct designation of the sons of God. It's a moniker, right, of the sons of God. Now, isn't it interesting that all of this is very nebulous in the biblical narrative, and it's esoteric for a reason. And I explain why to some degree in the book, because of our fallen condition, because we have fallen so far from Adam, who I believe freely interacted with his elder siblings in the family of God. There's a I'm trying to think of the best way to say this. There's a policy of separation, let's call it, between us and this elder race, because it's dangerous, because of our fallen condition. It's dangerous for us, and the reason why it's dangerous for us is apparent, because at least in days past, and this is going to be the case in the future as well, men, when they encountered these beings, tended to worship them. Mm-hmm. And so it's dangerous for us, but at the same time, by the same token, it's dangerous for them. It's dangerous for us to have contact with one another in our fallen condition, in our degenerate condition. So everything is very nebulous. Everything is very esoteric, as I said, as it relates to information pertaining to these sons of God. We're told about them but we're not told exactly who they are. But we have enough to infer who they are. There's certainly enough material to infer who they are. And I go through this in the book, and I demonstrate that clearly, these beings are, by these beings, I mean the angels, the sons of God, are very creative beings. They have a language. They write. They compose and play and sing and sing and play music. They have weapons of war. There's a military organization. The term heavenly host is a martial term. It means heavenly armies. It means the armies of heaven. That's literally what it means. So obviously these are very intelligent beings, and so we can derive from all of these clues that what we're dealing with here is a very ancient and very advanced civilization. These aren't just ethereal spirits floating around whose sole existence is to serve us. That's not who these beings are. Their purpose is not to serve us, it's to serve the Son of God. That's what their purpose is. And these are not just quote unquote spiritual beings. These are beings that are very much like us. They're not us. They're not human. We are made from the clay of the earth. We are distinctly terrestrial. We're made from the substance of the earth. They are not. So they're not the same as us in terms of species. They are different. You can think of them as a different species, as a different race. That's why I designate them as the elder race in my book, to draw that line of delineation, and also to highlight the fact that this is a civilization, and so that leads us to ask some very interesting questions. Once you realize that you're dealing with a class, a race of entities that predate us, that pre-exist us, and that are not from the earth. Clearly, they're not from the earth. Then you have to begin to consider certain terminology and rethink certain things that probably a lot of people, certainly in our audience, have already made up their mind about, but I think without really thinking it through. And what I'm getting at here is the terms extraterrestrial and alien, because this elder race qualifies as both. Extraterrestrial simply means something that is not terrestrial, that is not of the earth. So if you're a sentient being, or any creature for that matter, any biological entity, whose provenance, whose origin is not the earth, then you are by definition extra, meaning not of the earth, extraterrestrial. You're not of the earth. You are therefore extraterrestrial. And then the word alien means anything that is not us. Anything that's not human is by definition alien. It's alien to our species. And usually this is in the context of sentient life, sentient beings. But again, any biological life, whether it be an amoeba on Mars, would be an alien form of life. Why is it alien? Because it's not of planet Earth. It's associated with the word extraterrestrial, but also you can further define it as anything that is not human is alien to us, or that doesn't belong here on Earth. That's why we use the term alien for illegal aliens, for issues regarding immigrants and so forth, because they're not part of us. They're not integrated into who we are. They're alien to the citizens of the United States, and so. In that context, and that's in a geographical nation context. But when you're talking about a cosmological context, the word extraterrestrial and alien, I think has really caused a lot of trouble among Christians. Without cause, without really having a basis in any kind of breaches of doctrine or something. I think people suppose that it does. It really doesn't. And the reason why I talk about this in the very first chapter, actually, we really haven't got beyond the first chapter. Well, yeah. You did bring up the Rahab, which is extremely interesting. But the reason why this is also important is because if you start to get a context for who we are, who we are, the sons and daughters of Adam, in this cosmological theater, then the story, the narrative of Scripture starts to make a lot more sense and becomes much more living and explosive and relevant to the things that are now unfolding.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that in the book, because I think early on I rejected the phrase extraterrestrial to describe some of these entities, because the secular definition of extraterrestrial is that it's tied to evolution. It's tied to the theory of evolution, that, these biological entities grew out of goo and evolved into, sentient beings on some foreign planet or whatever. That was the context of the word extraterrestrial. But I think you sort of bring it back home, or you define it the way, if you just take it, and I think I've mentioned this, and I've come to agree with you on this point over time, is that if you just take the word at face value, then angels in essence are extraterrestrial, because they're not from Earth, and also Jude 1:6 is the one that really made it make sense to me. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation,
was not reserved,
reserved in everlasting chains under darkness. So they came here, and even the Watcher story, they came down on Mount Hermon, and even the angel of God. If you read the Bible, and this is what's crazy, people in the chat saying like it's not biblical, it's not theology. You look at Abraham; he ate with the angel of the Lord and two angels with him. Those weren't just like wispy spirits, they were actually there physically having a meal.
Flesh and blood.
Yeah, so I think it's
and what part of what we're saying so far does the audience think is not biblical?
I don't know about the audience. I think there's a couple people in chat that I've mentioned, or that did mention like, it's not biblical enough for me or something like that. But I don't know what part exactly.
There's a lot of conflict with flat earthers, because in flat earth ideology, there's no space, no other places,
outer space.
No outer space.
Well,
so the term extraterrestrial is a little triggering, and then there's some leanings towards Anunnaki type categorization, as well as some New Age. The word New Age getting thrown around a lot. Not that that's any of your responsibility.
Well, let's just back up for a moment, because it's important that people understand what I'm saying, and they understand what I'm not saying. I obviously do not subscribe to Zecharia Sitchin's ridiculous Anunnaki nonsense. He didn't even translate any of that correctly to begin with. But so what about the Anunnaki? So what? I mean, the Anunnaki, the story of the Anunnaki, according to Sitchin, is that these were extraterrestrials. They look like us. In fact, they created us. They came to the earth, and they basically spliced their DNA with a hominid, like a Bigfoot type creature, and created these lesser beings that were like their slaves, i.e. Adam. I think they even called them like Adama or something like that in the Sumerian text. And so forth and so on. What does any of that have to do with the biblical narrative? Nothing. I'm talking about a scenario in which there is a civilization. There are beings who are called the morning stars, angels, the sons of God, who pre-exist us. Full stop right there. Now, if somebody has a qualm with that, then they're going to have to go into the scriptures and try and disprove that that is true, because that is very much part of the biblical narrative. These entities clearly pre-exist us. And there's more than just the Job reference. There's a couple more that demonstrate that they are pre-existent to the human race. So on that point, we are on very firm biblical ground. And then the notion that these entities are part of a civilization rather than just some ethereal things floating around. Again, we can very safely infer, we can logically deduce that what we're dealing with is a civilization. And after all, these beings are riding around in chariots, right? Mm-hmm. They're wielding weapons of war. They're, as Gon said, they're eating and drinking on several occasions. In fact, if you recall, in Psalms, the psalmist describes manna, which the Israelites ate in the wilderness, manna as the food of the angels.
Right.
Is how he references it. So obviously there's eating and drinking in heaven. What Christian is going to want to deny that when we know that those of us who are in Christ are looking forward to the great banquet, the great supper, wedding supper of the Lamb, and the great banquet that the Bible talks about, and the feasting and the drinking. Jesus said, "I will not drink again from this cup, the fruit of the vine, until I am in the kingdom of my Father." There's lots of dozens and dozens and dozens of examples of eating and drinking in heaven, eating and drinking. Mm-hmm. And why do I stress this point? Because people have a false notion. They have this idea that there's two different worlds, that there's a spirit world and there's a carnal world, there's a fleshly world, and that those two worlds are distinct and separate. But I believe that's a misconstruence of a reality that's a little bit more complicated. But in essence, no such a division exists. There isn't a world for spiritual beings and a world for physical beings. Those two concepts are two sides of the same coin. We are perfect examples of this paradox, because we are beings of flesh and blood, and yet we have a spirit. And the body cannot live without the soul. The body cannot live without the spirit. And I guess you could ask the question, can the spirit live without the body? But the point is this: we have, and I say we because it took me a long time, and I'm still breaking through these barriers in my mind. I grew up in Sunday school, and so I still have to some degree what I call a Sunday school perception of the biblical narrative. And so I have these concepts that I have to, again, disabuse myself of, jettison, because they're simply not necessary or even a part of the biblical narrative. Now, I'm not saying there isn't, the spirit doesn't exist and things like that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that if you look at the resurrected Christ, by the way, that's what we're going to be. When Jesus rose from the grave and he appeared to his apostles, his disciples, understand that Jesus was fully human when he rose from the grave. He rose from the grave fully human, and he rose from the grave in a human body. Indeed, he had the markings of the crucifixion still apparent on his flesh. And when Jesus appeared to his disciples, who were on the second occasion, when they were on the first occasion, apparently he walked through the front door. On the second occasion, he walked through the wall. Right. And he appeared before his disciples, fully human. And his disciples were alarmed and perplexed because he suddenly appeared in their midst, and they thought he was a ghost. And what did Jesus tell them? He said, "Touch me. See that I have flesh and bone. Touch me." And they touched him, and they touched his hands or his wrists where the nails were driven, and Thomas even touched his side, the scar where the spear was thrust into his side. And Jesus is there before them with a fully corporeal body, fully physical body. This is the resurrected Christ. And then and this is always kind of comical to me, then Jesus, they're touching him and looking at him and still disbelieving that he's there in the flesh. And so he says to them, "Have you anything to eat? Have you anything to eat?" And they said, we got a fish and a piece of bread. And they gave them to Jesus, and it says he ate it in their midst. Why did he do that? Why did he do that? Because he was further proving to them that he was corporeal. He was in a body of flesh and bone. It was the resurrected Christ in the flesh. And he ate the fish, and assumedly he drank some water. And so he had a digestive tract, right? I mean, he still had the marks of the crucifixion on his hands and on his feet, and the scar on his side from the spear. And my point in saying all this is that's what we are going to be at the resurrection. We're not going to be like some ethereal beings. We're not going to get resurrected, and now we're like these spiritual beings floating around, and we're not really, we don't have flesh and blood anymore. This is the perception. This is that Sunday school perception that people have. It's not true. It's not true. And in fact, I will tell you this. At the resurrection, we are going to be more human than we are right now.
Amen.
Because we have degenerated from Adam. We are mutants. We have so greatly degenerated from Adam. By the way, that's why cancer exists. We are degenerates. And we have so many mutations, tens of thousands of mutations in our genomes. At the resurrection, what's going to happen at the resurrection? Our genome is going to be reset to the genetic blueprint of Adam. We're going to be fully restored to the human genetic matrix. We will be fully human in that moment.
Yeah, and this is these are ideas that I think early on really was it blew my mind when I was putting together Age of Deceit, which crazy enough, this is the 10th year anniversary of Age of Deceit. Been at this for a while, I guess. But one of the things that really clicked in my mind was why Jesus had to be born of a virgin. What's the significance of that? Why a virgin? And it started to make sense. Like, oh, if he was just born from the seed of Adam, then he would carry the same fallen nature as Adam, the one that we all carry, that you and I carry. But the fact that something that line was broken with the virgin birth, and it's a supernatural thing, but talk about that a little bit, because I know, you get into some of that. You have chapters on the exiles of Eden, and then the atrophy of Adam as sort of a way to discuss some of those issues. But what do you say to people, or can you describe that whole concept? Because it's one of those things that once you get it, you're like, oh my gosh, this isn't just, there's like a purpose behind it, because I didn't grow up in the church, but I knew about the virgin birth and, just the narrative of the gospel in a sense, just growing up. And I know a lot of people in church, they understand that Jesus was born of a virgin, but nobody ever explains why, So what do you say to that, Tim?
Well, that's part of what I call the Dragon Slayer prophecy. Other people call it I believe they call it the seed prophecy. Mm-hmm. Way back in Genesis 3, where it's prophesied, the Maker himself prophesied this. It didn't come from the lips of a human being or an angel. It came from the lips of God. And he said that regarding the serpent and the woman, mm-hmm. after their sin had been exposed, he told them that they're basically, paraphrasing, their seed would be in conflict. Mm-hmm. That the seed of the woman, that the serpent, that the woman was going to, basically what he was saying was that the woman was going to bear a child, and that this male child would be in conflict with the dragon, that the dragon would bruise his heel or strike his heel, depending on version you're reading, and that this male child, the seed of the woman, and of course, women don't have seed, men have seed. The seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head. And of course, as we were saying in the beginning, that prophecy relates to Christ. That is a prophecy of Christ. Sorry, somebody just fell down outside of my door. One of my kids.
They're breaching the gates.
So that prophecy pertains to Christ, and this is a thread in the book too that I follow. Again, I call this the dragon slayer prophecy because precisely because the seed of the woman, Christ, is going to crush the head of the dragon. He's going to slay the dragon, and but it's important to understand that this prophecy pertains to a son of Adam and a daughter of Eve. I mean, a son of Adam that would come through the womb, through the virgin womb of a daughter of Eve, and the fact that it was the seed of the woman that would do this was a calling card for the virgin birth. So obviously, women don't have seed; the men have the seed. So there's a prophetic aspect to all of that that's very important. But I actually this could get me into, now, if anything could get me to some controversial waters, this could. But I asked a question some years ago I was at a prayer meeting, and it was kind of like a Bible study, and it was like an open discussion, kind of just asking people, going around this circle of individuals seated there, asking them, what have you been thinking about? What have you been contemplating as it relates to the scriptures? And when it was my turn, I said, I've been contemplating something interesting as of late, having studied, done some studying up on genetics and refreshing myself on all of that I learned in high school. And I said, my question is, if we know that every single human being has two sets of chromosomes, we have one from our mom and one from our dad, and we know that our mom can only supply an X chromosome. The Y chromosome, the chromosome that makes me or any other man a male as opposed to a female, is exclusively supplied through the father. And so my question was very simple. Knowing this now in the 21st century, understanding this principle of genetics, let's ask the question, where did Jesus get his Y chromosome? I mean, Jesus was fully human. Yeah. Make no mistake about it. He was fully human. He had to be. Remember why Jesus came. Jesus came to redeem and reconcile the sons and daughters of Adam. And so Jesus became a son of Adam in order to do that. He had to. And so it's a very simple question. Where did Jesus get his Y chromosome? Now, you have to have a Y chromosome. You can't not have one. To be a human being, to be a human male, you have to have a Y chromosome. It's impossible to be a human male without one. Jesus, believe me, he had a Y chromosome. That's why he was a male, a human male. Now, the easy answer is that he got it from God. That's an easy answer, and it very well may be the true answer and the only answer. He got it from God, but it seems a little bit too easy for me. I think there's something else going on here. And the reason why I say this, and I don't write about this in my book, by the way, so we're kind of treading new ground here, but
exclusive content.
I've contemplated this a lot. So Jesus gets his Y chromosome from somebody. He has to. He's got to have a Y chromosome. He didn't get it from Mary. Now, there is an interesting line of inquiry here related to Joseph. Remember, Joseph, the husband of Mary, but not yet the husband of Mary when she gets pregnant, and that was the scandal and why they kept it quiet. Joseph, there was a problem with Joseph's family line, and I can't recall. You can go and research this yourself, the audience. There was a problem with Joseph's family line leading to David. There was like a curse in that family line. And I can't remember who it related to, but it's there. It's in the Book of Kings or something. And Joseph's heritage, his genetic heritage, goes back to this individual that was problematic in terms of fulfilling the scriptures. Christ coming from, remember who Christ was supposed to come from? David. Right. Now, if you read, and again, we're in new territory here. Again, this is not. I don't write about this in the book, but it is certainly, a fascinating subject. By the way, when I brought this up, what it literally, just me asking the question, where did Jesus get his Y chromosome from? It unleashed pandemonium in that meeting. Pandemonium. I mean, people were screaming at each other, crying. I'm telling you, it was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen in a meeting. One simple question unleashed pandemonium. But I'm trying to pull up. Let me pull up really quick here because I got to finish this thought now, or I'm going to be in dangerous territory. I'm pulling up.
Is it
Romans 1? Because I think that the answer is in Romans 1. So if you read Romans 1, so let's refresh ourselves with the question: where did Jesus get his Y chromosome? Now we have one answer on the table. It is the answer that most people will offer immediately, in that Christ got his Y chromosome from God. Okay, that's a potential answer, certainly, and it's on the table. But there's another one that I think is very compelling. He didn't get it from Joseph. I think we can all say that conclusively. Jesus did not get a Y chromosome from Joseph. Now, if we read in Romans 1, Paul begins his letter to the Romans, to the church in Rome, this way. Paul, a bondservant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, separated to the gospel of God, which he promised before through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, who was born of the seed, there's that seed, who was born of the seed or sperm of David, according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead. So my answer, when people ask me, well, what's your answer to the question of where did Jesus get his Y chromosome? I go to Romans 1, and I say, Jesus got his Y chromosome from David. Mm-hmm. So I believe that because of that blemish in the line of Joseph, which was probably something to do with the dragon. You know, the audience can go and research that and probably find some interesting threads in that narrative. Again, I don't do it in the book. Maybe that's for a future book. I believe that God did supply Jesus's Y chromosome, but God is spirit. He's not a fleshly being. He doesn't have a Y chromosome. God used the Y chromosome, I believe, directly from David.
That's
and
really
Jesus, therefore, was literally the offspring of David. And by the way, Mary's lineage does go back to David.
Right.
And so does Joseph's. But there's that one hitch in Joseph's line. A very, very interesting line of inquiry of research. I did it years ago, and I can't remember the details, so I'm not going to go down that path. But you'll see if you look into it. There's a problem. There's a hitch in Joseph's line that is problematic for Christ, according to the Scripture. So I think that God supplied the Y chromosome. It couldn't come through Joseph, so he used David's seed, the Y chromosome of David. That's how I think Jesus was a human male. Because he was a human male. He wasn't a supernatural male. He was a human male, just like you're human and I'm human. And
yeah, that doesn't seem like it should be too upsetting.
Well, like I said,
I can certainly follow the logic on that.
Chaos and pandemonium in the meeting I was in. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that meeting ended in people yelling and screaming and storming out.
This is sounds like a fun night.
Yeah, bring Tim to your Bible studies, everybody.
That's how you get the invites, man. Well, that is very fascinating, I do got to say. And yeah, that is interesting when it comes to, one thing that was kind of thrown around in the chat was like, well, it's a miracle. Why do we even wonder? Why do we even ask that question? Why do we care? It's just,
I'm going to tell you, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but I got to tell you why we care, because it's right here. It's right here. In First Romans, concerning his son, Jesus Christ, our Lord, who was born of the seed of David according to the flesh and declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness. Paul is saying this is part and parcel of the gospel, not necessarily, my theory that Jesus got his Y chromosome from David, but understanding who Jesus was and why he was who he was.
Right.
And who Jesus was us. He was a son of Adam, had to be a son of Adam in order to fulfill the scriptures.
Right. The promise that started in Genesis 3. To fulfill that, he had to do this in this way.
And furthermore, through the line of David, to fulfill the scriptures. So that's why it's important, is because it's crucial to the person of Christ that he fulfill those prophecies.
Right.
And so it's no small matter. Now, I'm not saying I'm right, but it's my hunch, let's say, that he got his Y chromosome literally from the genome of David.
Yeah, and this is, if I'm not mistaken, it's the branch of King Jehoiakim or Jeconiah.
That sounds familiar.
Which gets omitted in the lineage in Matthew 1. He skips over it, and maybe that's why it kind of puts all the pieces together there. But yeah, it's very fascinating. I haven't actually dug into that side of things, so that's more homework for me. But just looking at the time here, I think we're doing okay. Are you doing okay on time, Tim? Can we go a little bit longer?
Sure.
So
can I get a 1 minute break?
Yeah.
I can do. Sure. We can do some announcements while you
get some water.
Okay, I'll be right back.
This is live, Tim. You can't just disappear on a live broadcast.
Tim walked out on us. It's our second guest walking out on us.
Through this, you have to sit through it. Okay, well, I guess we'll take this second. Thanks, everybody, for being here on the live broadcast. We are here, if you just got here, talking with Tim Alberino about his new book called Birthright, The Coming Posthuman Apocalypse and the Usurpation of Adam's Dominion on Planet Earth. And we just got some exclusive content, some exclusive Tim Alberino content on his theories about where did Jesus' Y chromosome go? But what do you think, Gons? We don't really have any producers or anybody to think, oh my gosh, he's coming back so fast.
Sorry, guys, I had to take a leak. Consequence of drinking a lot of coffee and water.
That was great. I did such a good job filling the time, Tim. You'd be so proud of me. Those of you who know Tim, one thing he always tells you is how good Basil is at filling time.
What I'm known for.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a
filling
chapter
in my
book.
Okay, so Gons, did you have somewhere you wanted to go?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to.
Okay.
Well, did you have something? If you had something, then you can.
Well, I do, but I don't want to interrupt your thing because I think I don't want to skip ahead. I might skip ahead of your thing, and I don't want to do that.
Not really. I mean, I wanted to talk briefly about so I actually screenshotted a chart that you have in the book that I think is going to be helpful for people to parse through some of this information, and it's more of an eschatological part of the discussion. And I'm going to move you, Tim, just real briefly so people can see the diagram here. And for those of you watching, it's 3 concentric circles. And on the left, it has the new religion, apotheotheism. On the right, the alien
That's
threat.
What I wanted to talk about.
Okay. On the right is the alien threat and the golden race. And on the bottom is the posthuman paradigm, genetics, robotics, AI, and nanotech, which is the GRIN technologies. And in the middle, overlapping all three, is a new golden age Apollo revealed. And I think moving this discussion from the foundations to the future, we've talked about transhumanism since day one of Canary Cry Radio. It was very early on in my starting the YouTube channel and all that. It was very much seeing the movement of transhumanism, where it was going, what the whole ideology is of that movement itself, and its apotheosis. It's clearly that's what it is. It's esoteric, but it's also ancient. And also, where does the alien thing fit into that? And it actually assists in the whole process of things. And the posthuman paradigm, just what is the goal here? And I think when we talk about, because what happens is we talk about these issues, and most people are like, hey, I don't want to enhance myself. I don't want to reverse aging. I just want to, die the way I'm going to die and all this. And you're fine. We don't want to mess with our genetics the way it is too much, because obviously if you mess with it to a certain degree, you're going to lose your humanity. And I think that's prophetic and eschatological. However, and I've mentioned this, I try to make this point in Age of Deceit 3 and somewhat in 2 and over a bunch of videos over the years, but our hope is in Christ. Our resurrected bodies is part of the great hope. The Dr. Michael Heiser talks about the already not yet. So yes, we are saved, but we have not experienced our full restoration. And part of that is, hey, I'm going to go ahead and put my faith in Christ, that the resurrection that he initiated, that he demonstrated for us, it's a blueprint for the rest of us, which is pretty crazy to think, but that's pretty much what the scriptures talk about. So if you want to, can you do a little breakdown of each of these things, apotheotheism, the alien threat, the posthuman paradigm, and how it all relates to the new golden age and Apollo revealed?
Okay. This requires me to, I'm going to try and be
read
much
your book.
Briefer now.
Just read out of your book and yeah.
I'm going to attempt to be more brief in my answers here because I've been very long-winded. In order to understand where I'm going in the book in terms of the posthuman paradigm and these three concentric circles and why they're going to lead to the revealing of Apollo and a new golden age, you have to understand what is the primary crux, I think, of this book, which is the principal concept is the concept of a birthright. That's why the book's called Birthright. Mm-hmm. That we were endowed, as I said, with the authority, with dominion of the earth. Basically, we were given the title deed of the earth, and that endowment was contingent on. This is really jumping really, really far ahead, but it's contingent on our humanity, on us being human, and I just jumped over a whole lot of content there. But what I mean by that is we have to talk about the image of God really quick before we talk about posthumanism. There's this topic, the image of God, it was such a confusing topic for me for such a long time when I was growing up, and because there were so many different opinions about what is the image of God, and there's this general consensus that the image of God means it's attributive. In other words, it reflects our human attributes, which are godlike, which are like his attributes. We're creative, we're smart, we can think critically and logically, we can reason, we can make music, and we do all of these artistic things. So that creative attribute is a reflection of our image of God, and so it was attributive. That's the way it was taught to me when I was growing up. Not really discussed very often. It always seemed to be an afterthought. The image of God, that we're created in the image of God, and it occurred to me some many years ago. At this point, from this point, while I was in the Amazon, actually, as a young man, 18 or 19 years old, I can't remember exactly how old I was at the time, and I was in the Amazon, and I was alone in the jungle one day, pacing by the river, contemplating Eden. You know, it was a natural thing to do when you're surrounded by the verdure of the Amazon jungle and all the wildlife and so forth. And so I was contemplating Eden and contemplating the story of Adam and Eve, and I had some epiphanies that really took, years and years and years to develop. And those epiphanies were the beginning of this book. That's why I wrote this book, is some of the epiphanies I had out there. And no, it did not involve ayahuasca or weed or something like that. Back then I never even drank alcohol. I never even drank a beer at that point. So let alone smoke a cigarette or something. I did occasion a pipe, but with tobacco in it.
Got him.
So the point is that I was thinking about the image of God. What does the image of God mean? Because it doesn't seem logical to me. It doesn't seem like the correct answers. It's attributive. That just seems so weak, and it didn't have any explanatory power behind it, because it seemed like this was so important that we're made in the image of God, and nobody could really put their finger on it. And I know that I think some people have, in my opinion, have come quite close. And you mentioned Michael Heiser, and his. I believe I've only read one of his books, but I believe that he holds to the view that we are imagers of God, and I subscribe to that idea. But I take it a step further. I believe that the image of God is something very specific. It's very practical. And it's very apparent. This is the image of God. What you're wearing is the image of God. This is it. This is the image right here. It's not attributive. It's not that I'm creative or that I have the ability to think, again, to reason and so forth, that I have these higher brain functions. No, it's not attributive. It's literally this. This is the image of God. It's literally the way that we look, as opposed to, in contrast to, the way that other things look. Let's be a little more specific. We look different than other sentient entities. Okay? Now, the image of God, and I do spend a great deal of time in the book explaining this, so I'm gonna try and cap it really quick here so that we can move on to the post-human stuff, because I can't talk post-human stuff until we understand what human is and why it's so important that we remain human. So we're literally wearing the image. We're created literally wearing it. This is the image of God. You're wearing it. Man or woman in the audience, you are wearing the image of God. Exactly as it states. It's that simple. It's that practical. You're wearing it. And I came to the realization that I believe that in the hierarchy of the kingdom, those who were created to be a part of the family look like each other. In other words, me and my siblings are all in the same family, and we all look like our parents, my mom and dad. We're part of the family. We look like each other. There are no families in which one of the kids is born, looking like a gazelle. That doesn't happen. So because the Bible, so much of this story in the Bible, the narrative of Scripture, has to do with the family. There's really two underlying frames of reference when you read the Scripture. There's a familial frame of reference. The sons of God, we are the brethren, and Jesus is the Son of God, and so forth. So there's this familial. There's the language of family, let's call it, and then there's also the language of kingdom, and that language tends to be martial in its tone. In other words, we're talking about armies, and we're talking about the order, the military order, and the kingdom, and the governance of the kingdom. So you have these two concepts. You have the family and you have the kingdom, and they're related. Okay, but there's a difference. The difference is that there's a lot of things in the kingdom. Okay, there's a lot of stuff, people in the kingdom, but not everybody in the kingdom are part of the family. And that makes sense. We all understand that. That makes perfect sense to us here on the earth. We can grasp that concept quite easily. You can have a kingdom, and then you have the king and the royal family. There's lots of people in the kingdom, but not everybody is part of the family. And the family is the ruling class. So let's make a distinction right away here. I'm not saying that the people in the kingdom who are not part of the family are other human beings. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that those who are a part of the family look like us, or it's really the reverse. We look like them. Remember, we're the younger sibling. Okay? Now, do we encounter this in the scriptures? Yes, we do. We do. And it's actually quite inconspicuous in the scriptures. When personalities in the biblical narrative encounter these beings who are called angels / the sons of God / morning stars, when they encounter these beings, what do they look like? Or rather, I should say, whom do they look like? Us. They look like us. Reverse, we look like them. And this is one of those things that you have to disabuse yourself of. One of those things that you have to relinquish that comes from a Sunday school perspective is that angels are these entities with big wings. They got these big wings, or that they have multiple heads or a bunch of eyes all over their bodies. That's not true. We need to be able to separate prophetic iconography, which is extremely symbolic. That's the point of it, with real life encounters and circumstances in which human beings actually encounter, not in the context of a vision, but just as you referenced earlier, Gans, angels eating and drinking with Abraham. That's the context where we can actually see who are these people, what do they look like, and when we look in those contexts where you're having a real-time interaction, wherever it is in the Bible, what you are viewing here are beings who look a lot like us, almost identical. And that's why Paul says that you can entertain angels unawares. Mm-hmm. Not because they metamorphosize. I don't believe angels have the power to metamorphosize. Not because they metamorphosize into human form. They take on human form. That's magic. That's not what's going on. It's because that's what they actually look like. And I believe that probably most angels look like young men in their 20s or early 30s with clear eyes, probably in most cases blue and golden blonde hair. And they probably are about 6.5 feet tall. And I have reasons for saying that, and I talk about it in the book. Okay? And I believe that this is exactly who. No wings, no eyes all over the place, no multiple heads. Now, why did I go through all that? Because why do we look the same? Why do we have the same image? Because we are a part of the same family. Going back to the prodigal son, we are siblings in the Father's house. We were created to be siblings. And so we look like each other. Now, there's a reason why we look the way we do. Because the image of God is the seal of authority. And again, I'm going to try and get through this really quick. I don't know how much time we have, but so if let's try and simplify this concept, and I hope I'm not losing everybody here. To try and simplify this concept, remember, we're dealing with a kingdom. It's the kingdom of God. If I'm a king, and let's say, Basil, you are I'm going to dispatch you as a regent in the kingdom. We have conquered a new territory. We've conquered a new territory, and I need to send a regent to govern that territory. That's what a regent is. A regent governs with the authority of the king, okay? That's what a regent is. He doesn't govern of his own authority. He's invested with authority, and the king sends him to govern somewhere on his behalf, okay? So he's a representative of the kingdom. I'm going to dispatch you to this new land we've conquered. You are going to govern that land. You need two things. In order for you to govern successfully, or to govern at all, there are two things that you need that are indispensable. Otherwise, the enterprise is futile. The first thing that you need is you need a certificate of authority. You need a seal of authority from me. So you need to show up with some kind of certificate with my seal on it. So that when you show up, and again, we're not talking about the modern age, we're talking about, traditionally speaking, the Middle Ages and back beyond that. When you show up to that region, and the people in that region ask you, what gives you the right? Who gave you the right to govern us? And you produce this certificate with the seal of the king. And they see and they recognize the seal of the king, and then they understand that you have been sent as a regent, and you're not there of your own authority, just like Jesus wasn't here of his own authority. You're not here of your own authority, but you are here on the authority of the king. You were dispatched from the king. Okay, that's the first thing you need. The second thing you need is tied into that. The second thing you need, aside from the authority and the certification and the seal of authority from the king, you need the armies of the kingdom, the guarantee that the armies of the kingdom are behind you. So if you show up with the seal of authority and you say, I've been sent by the king, I'm the governor of this region, the people say, screw you and rise up against you, guess who's coming? The armies of the kingdom are coming because they are enforcing your authority. So you have to have both a certificate, a seal of authority, and you have to have the enforcement of the soldiery of the kingdom to enforce your authority. You have to have both. You can't just have one or the other. You have to have both, and they go together. And that is how, if you're dispatched, again, if I dispatch you to an area that we just conquered, you show up, you have the seal of authority, the certificate of authority, the seal, the royal seal. Those people know that if they cross you, they're not just crossing you, they're crossing me and my armies. Okay? That's authority 101. And that is how the kingdom of heaven operates. Mm-hmm. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this. Historically speaking, and I'm talking going all the way back to the Sumerians and probably even beyond the Sumerians, even before the Sumerians into the antediluvian world. That certificate of authority that you would carry was either a clay tablet or later on it was a piece of parchment, usually rolled up. In both cases, that certificate was sealed. And it was sealed usually with a ring. And so if I'm the king again in this context, like say in a medieval context, I have a seal. Most kings carried a seal in the form of a ring. If they didn't in the form of a ring, they had a stamp. We still do this today, by the way, but it was much more common in the past. In fact, it was standard in the past, standard. They would, let's say, for the sake of argument, like the Pope. The Pope had a seal, right? He had a seal on his finger in the form of a ring. And when the Pope was going to issue a papal bull, like the one he did to condemn Martin Luther, he would write the letter, he'd roll it up or fold it, and then he would take wax, usually like a rose or red-colored wax, dip it on the piece of paper, the parchment, to actually seal it, to actually close it, and then he would take his ring with his royal seal, which is also the seal of his house, take his royal seal, and he would press it into the wax. And then it would have, of course, it would imprint what was carved into his ring. People are already getting the point of where I'm going here. and so then when that papal bull was delivered to Martin Luther and he got it in his hand and he looked at it, he saw, what did he see? He saw the seal of the Pope, or the seal of the king in a different context. That was the seal of the king. That was the confirmation that this person or this document had the authority of the king to do what they're supposed to do. In other words, a regent, you showing up with that seal, you are invested with my authority, and the seal is the proof of that authority, is the authentication of your commission as a regent from me. All right. And that's historical fact. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you know what the seal, more often than not, in a historical context, what was engraved on that seal?
Some sort of crest or something?
In most cases, what was engraved on the seal, let's say it's a ring, was my likeness, the likeness of the king.
Oh, interesting.
If I was dispatching you as my regent, that seal that you're going to be carrying in your hand is stamped, is sealed with a depiction of me, my likeness. So most of the time, and you can look this up, look at seals. Most of the time, if the seals of a potentate, of a king, of a prince, of a pope, usually actually was a carving and engraving of their likeness.
Yeah,
kind of like with the coins and stuff too.
Exactly.
Right.
But coins are different than seals, but very much like that. So okay, now let's talk about Adam. Adam was created for a purpose, remember, not created and then given a purpose, created for a purpose. What was his purpose? He had a purpose that was twofold. First and foremost, he was to be a sibling in the royal house, in the family of God. And his purpose in that capacity was fellowship with his maker. Number one. Number two, he was to be regent of the earth and govern the earth for the kingdom.
Right.
That's his dual purpose. So, because he was created to have authority, to be a governor, to be a regent, he was created in the image of God, in the likeness of a son of God. And it was his very likeness that was the seal of his authority. So in other words, imagine God creating Adam. What did he create Adam out of? The clay of the earth. Imagine God taking his signet ring, his royal signet ring, bearing what? His likeness. And by the way, this is the Son of God. The Bible makes this clear. This is the Son of God, who's the maker. So he takes his seal that's on his ring, let's say, his signet ring, which bears his likeness, and he presses it into the earthen clay to create his regent. So the certification, that certificate, the seal of our authority is this. It's the image that we have. It's literally this. It's what we look like. We look like a sibling in the royal family. We look like the sons of God who were created to have authority. They're part of the royal family. And the ruling house, the ruling class. Adam was a part of the ruling class. That's why he was made in the image of the sons of God, to bear the image of the Son of God, by the way. So that's what we're seeing in Genesis. And by the way, the Hebrews, the ancient Hebrews, were very, very much aware of this principle, because don't forget that Abraham, there was no Israel, there was no Hebrew before Abraham. Where did Abraham come from? He either came from Sumeria or Acadia, basically the same culture. Those are where the cylinder seals come from. And what did the Sumerians do with the cylinder seals? And this is, the king would have his seal and it would have his likeness. They would literally roll it into clay. So that's the depiction that we're getting in Genesis of the creation of Adam, that you can envision God pressing the seal, his signet ring, into the earthen clay, literally, and creating a being in his likeness, sealed with his authority. The regent of planet Earth, here to govern on behalf of the king. That was our mandate. That was Adam's mandate.
Wow.
He was Son of God, created to govern the earth. That was his birthright. So, summing that up, the seal, the image of God, in my opinion, is literally this. We wear it. We're sealed with his likeness in our biology. When you look in the mirror, you are looking at the seal of the king's signet ring pressed into earthen clay.
Yeah.
And why? Why did he do that? Well, the answer goes along with another question. Why are there armies of heaven? Why are there armies? Because there are enemies. That's why. Right. The kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. There are enemies. There are insurgents. And so if we are created to govern the earth and to have dominion, we're given the seal. We're created in his likeness so that everybody else, all other potential contenders for dominion of the earth, will recognize our authority. That we have been given dominion of the earth. And if you mess with us, guess who's coming? The armies of the kingdom, who enforce our dominion on earth. But our dominion is contingent on our humanity. That's why posthumanism is a trap. It's a pitfall. It's designed to usurp our birthright. And I know this to be the case because it's not going to be the first time. The first time was the Genesis 6 affair. Right. That's the first time our birthright was usurped. Why? Because the Watchers created their own hybrid offspring. And this gets us off the topic of where we're headed. Maybe I shouldn't go down this road. Anyway, I won't for now. Pointing to the posthuman question. That's why posthumanism is so dangerous. Because there is something in our genetic code that is distinct, that makes us human. In fact, I can't remember the name of it. I think it's H something something. There's a line of code in our genome that makes us distinctly human. No other creature has it except for us. So there's something about us, there's something in our genetic matrix that makes us human. I submit that whatever that is part and parcel with the image of God that we bear. And if we lose that, if we forfeit it, if we abdicate it, then the armies of the kingdom will not enforce our authority. And all hell will break loose. We will lose our dominion. And again, it won't be the first time it happened. It happened in Genesis 6. So this is a concept that is very complicated, very difficult to summarize, but I go to great lengths, I think, to describe to explain it in the book. Hopefully I do an adequate job. But I think it is supremely important that we understand that our dominion on earth is directly associated with us remaining human. The sons and daughters of Adam have dominion of the earth as long as they remain human. Wow. And that's why posthumanism is such a troubling prospect.
Yeah.
Well, listeners of this show and our other shows here obviously know how Gons and I feel about transhumanism and posthumanism related concepts there. And that really gives a whole nother, another aspect of weight when especially as believers, we are confronted with either the different opportunities or the different, a different word for forced opportunities that we as a society are sort of staring in the face, whether it's transhumanism in a technological sense or a biological sense, or of course people are worried about vaccines and things like that as well. But it gives a whole much deeper aspect of consideration when we're considering whether to get Neuralink or some sort of biological upgrade. I'll tell you what.
Well, it does, and the real issue is going to be when some of the more significant genetic, let's call them products hit the market, the enhancement products. There's a market already developing for human enhancement.
Yeah.
And it's going to start off as most of this kind of stuff does. It's going to start off in hospitals with gene therapy, which I don't have any problem with gene therapy, by the way, because you're taking unmutated human genes and replacing mutated human genes. So I don't have any problem with gene therapy. But there's going to come a point in time in the future when we're doing two things: when we're doing cross-species genetics, which is an abomination to God, and when we're creating synthetic genes. And that's coming quickly. It's coming quickly. We can already create a synthetic chromosomes. We can already do it. We could do it in 2005. So we know how to create human artificial chromosomes. They're called hacks. You know, the DARPA was researching and developing hacks, and there's a reason why they're called hacks. You know, the military loves its acronyms. It's literally to hack your genome by introducing artificial synthetic chromosomes, hacking your genome. So in other words, you can create a chromosome with new genetic information in it, maybe genetic information derived from animals or aliens, and insert it into the human genome to deliver, like a delivery system, a vector, to insert it into the human genome and change your genetic code, change your the base pairs of your genome. In other words, change your genes. So we're just now beginning. It's in the infant stages, but make no mistake about it. We are in the beginning of the hybrid age. We are in the beginning of, I would call it, the second hybrid age, in the beginning of the genetic revolution. And it's going to take a while to unfold, but there's going to come a point in time when people, my kids and certainly my grandkids, are going to have to make fundamental choices. Okay, let's just be very practical about it. University students, if the majority of university students have enhancements to the cerebral cortex, have genetic enhancements that allow them to have a greater capacity for memory and so forth. If my grandson wants to compete in university, how is he going to do it without being enhanced? How's he going to do it?
Yeah.
And by the way, there's so much that can be said of all of this. There's so many different angles here. By the way, it just hit the mainstream news. I couldn't believe it. I was watching the mainstream news the other day, and they were openly talking about how the new arms race is genetically modified super soldiers.
Yeah.
In the mainstream media, genetically modified super soldiers. Nobody's worried about atomic bombs anymore. Everybody's worried about these genetically modified war fighters.
Right.
So it's here. It is here. And again, we've got to be really, really wise about this. If somebody out there has cancer, right? Because let's understand what cancer is. Cancer is a mutation in a gene. That's what cancer is. That's exactly what it is. Now, it snowballs biologically into cells malfunctioning and reproducing without turning off and dying like they're supposed to. Okay, but it begins in the gene. It is a mutation. This is well known. This is the fundamental of cancer. Cancer is a mutation in the genome. Okay, so if you have a gene that's mutated, you have a cancer that's the result of a mutation in your gene, and let's say your brother or your sister, the doctor says, we're going to do gene therapy. We're going to go in and we're going to take that same sequence, that same gene from your brother, your sister, or somebody else that's not mutated, and take it and replace your mutated gene. That is not the stuff I'm talking about, because that's human to human. That is repairing the human genome with human genes. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so I don't want people to freak out and reject gene therapies when it's human to human. Human to human, repairing the human genome with human. And by the way, when you're repairing your human genome, you are repairing mutated genes that are mutants. So I wouldn't hesitate if I knew for sure, which is the case right now, that the genes that are being inserted in my body are human genes. That's not a problem for me, because it's like looking for the spelling error in a sentence and taking a sentence that has the same words and just taking the right words and copying and pasting where they should be in the sentence with the errors. So people need to not get too worked up about this, and people who have cancer possibly missing out on very good treatments like gene therapy. So we are talking about, like I said, scenarios in which genetic material, basically, let's put it in these terms, creating GMO human beings, taking genetic material from other things, other species that are not us, and grafting those into our genome, copying and pasting those into our genome. That's where we should right away be able to draw a definitive line and say that is an abomination.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, we're going to have to get real sharp about this stuff real fast. And nobody's talking besides you guys, but I'm talking about, mainstream churches are not discussing this.
Yeah, not at all. And I want to tackle a couple things you mentioned about the seal and the image. It reminded me, it's interesting how a neuroscientist from Stanford happens to agree with your take there. His name is William Hurlbut.
And he's good old Hurlbut.
Hurlbut, yeah. He was interviewed for the Inhuman documentary, and he basically said that it's unethical to create machines that look human. It's unethical. That was his point of view. And so I think what you're getting at with it's kind of an extension of the idea that there's something sacred about the human form, and that to mimic it and give it purpose and all this kind of stuff, you're almost playing God. And then tying some of what you were talking about to Revelation 13 and the mark and the image. Well, before I go there was somebody, Nikki H in the chat, asked a question or mentioned or stated a comment. I'm not going to tell some unbeliever that he has attributes of God. And this goes back to, and I think, talking about the image, that we bear the image of God. And I think it goes back to, are you going to accept your humanity or are you going to reject your humanity? And when you reject your humanity, you're basically accepting what another would offer, which ties into the whole Revelation 13, mark of the beast, an image of the beast. And the thing that I've pointed out over and over again, I've tried to drive home a lot on this channel over the years, is that the image of the beast is, number one, it's created by humans. Okay, so the false prophet tells mankind to build the image to the beast, which was what looks to be kind of like a false resurrection or a counterfeit resurrection of types. And then in verse 15, it says the second beast was permitted to give breath to the image of the first beast. So it's really like a life form, mimicking the creation of man in Genesis by giving it breath, and that the image could speak and cause all who refuse to worship it to be killed. And that idea of worship, that's what all of this comes down to. And worship being the act of religious devotion towards a deity or towards your creator. If you're worshiping the beast as your creator, you're effectively giving up your humanity. You're no longer, like you said, your birthright. You're giving it up. In exchange, it's almost like selling your soul. It is selling your soul, basically. You become irredeemable. And, we talk about the supernatural side of things, or the metaphysical with your soul, your spirit. But I think the conversations that need to take place now is, and computer science has really been an interesting development to help us understand these things, is that there is a software side to us, like an immaterial part of us, but we also have a hardware side, our bodies, like you were talking about. And you can mess with the software by messing with the hardware, and you can mess with the software, obviously, to mess with the hardware too. But it's like a two-way street. And I think people, I'm guilty of this too, early on, trying to think like, oh, there's a spirit realm and a physical realm, and they don't touch. It's like a different thing. But I think the more we look at this, it's like, no, they're intertwined they're intertwined. And you can mess with one.
The same coin.
Yeah, and you can mess with one and it affects the other. And I think we're starting to understand that more and more. And the idea of, Daniel 2:43, the iron mixed with miry clay, stuff like that. And given your chart here, these promises of apotheotheism and even the alien agenda coming into play, that, hey, we're going to help you advance humanity, whatever narrative the alien narrative is going to be, whether it be we're going to help you advance, or we're going to help you bring peace by having an ascension type of thing with your genetic thing, which a lot of New Agers talk about. They talk about ascension and DNA upgrades and stuff like that. And then coming at it from the technological side of things. And it's all sort of fusing and coming together. And it's like this great, it is the great deception, because it is trying to get humanity to give up their birthright, right? And that's why I kept saying,
Jacob and Esau.
Right. And you end the book with that. Do you want to kind of touch on that and then we'll wrap it up? You're a little worn out.
It's hard to touch on anything.
It is hard to touch on anything.
It's also complicated. It is very complicated, but I think what I'll do is to try and constrain myself, because I tend to get very I tend to pontificate and end up being much more long-winded than I need to be and take up a lot of time. So let me just read this, okay? So let's talk about Jacob and Esau for a moment. I do end the book with Jacob and Esau because it's a perfect depiction. It's a perfect portrait of everything that I lay out in the beginning of the book, everything I lay out leading up to chapter 13, which is Jacob and Esau. The story begins, Jacob and Esau, the story begins with Rebekah, the wife of Isaac and daughter-in-law of Abraham, who is barren. Isaac prays for his wife, and she becomes pregnant with twins. But when the time comes to deliver the babies, something rather bizarre occurs. The first came forth red, all his body like a hairy mantle. This is reading from the scripture. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came forth, and his hand had taken hold of Esau's heel. So they called his name Jacob. Or so his name was called Jacob. And then I write this. I remember how perplexed I was as a young lad in Sunday school when my teacher glibly recited these verses as if what they were describing was perfectly normal. I suppose that being a twin myself, I was especially alarmed to discover that the first boy to emerge from Rebekah's womb looked like the red spawn of Bigfoot. Twins are supposed to resemble one another, are they not? Something was wrong with this picture. Even if Jacob and Esau were fraternal twins as opposed to identical twins, the fact that one of them was red and hairy like a mantle should give us pause. And then, okay, I'll just continue here because this is going to be the easiest way to explain this. So continuing, as previously established, Esau means red, which I established earlier in the book. He would later be called Edom. Jacob means heel holder or supplanter because he had taken hold of Esau's heel. He would later be called Israel. The story of Jacob and Esau revolves around the concept of a birthright. In ancient times, a father, before passing away, would bequeath his patriarchal authority and material possessions to his firstborn son as an inheritance, a birthright. Once given, the blessing of the birthright could not be rescinded. It could, however, be abdicated. As Esau was born first, the birthright belonged to him. And then, of course, I talk about how Jacob was able to impersonate his brother Esau and ended up getting the blessing conferred upon him rather than Esau by his father, who was blind at the time. And most of you will remember the story that Rebekah favored Jacob and wanted I might as well just read it. When Isaac was on his deathbed and blind, the time had come to bestow the birthright to Esau. However, Rebekah favored Jacob and persuaded him to fool his father by impersonating his brother so that the birthright would pass to him instead. Jacob, realizing that his father would likely touch him to confer the blessing, made the obvious observation. Behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. The word hairy in this instance comes from the Hebrew sair, which is most commonly associated with a male goat. Esau wasn't hairy like a man, Esau was hairy like a goat. Rebekah's solution to the problem removes all doubt that Esau was inhumanly hairy. She covered Jacob's arms and neck in goatskins. And then I talk about there is a disorder called hypertrichosis, also known as werewolf syndrome, where you can be born, and there are about 50 people alive today, 30 to 50 people with this genetic disorder where you literally are covered with hair, head to foot, even your face. That's why they call it werewolf syndrome. But then I point out that is a possibility. Did Esau have werewolf syndrome? And then I say there is, however, another possibility. Esau was not entirely human. And I'm going to continue here because this is really an important part here that I think people need to ponder. It cannot be coincidental that both Abraham's wife Sarah and Isaac's wife Rebekah were barren. Neither is it a coincidence that in both cases an ill-begotten elder sibling threatened the continuity of the family line. In the first case, it was Ishmael, and in the second, Esau. Furthermore, we must not fail to recognize the parallels between Cain and Abel, Ishmael and Isaac, and Esau and Jacob. Every one of these sibling contenders was directly influenced by Satan, who intended to corrupt the bloodline of the Christ and usurp the birthright of Adam. Just as John had beheld, well, I referenced the woman of the vision of the dragon, which we didn't get into, but it's part of the dragon slayer prophecy that I talk about. So the point is this. Jacob and Esau, it's very interesting because I don't personally believe that Esau had werewolf syndrome. I don't think he had hypertrichosis. I personally believe that Esau was not fully human, and he was usurping the birthright that belonged to Jacob. Belonged to Jacob, not to him, to Jacob, even though he was the firstborn. And Jacob grabbed his heel. As he was making his way through the birth canal, Jacob reaches up and grabs his heel. Jacob is called, of course, the supplanter, the heel grabber, the supplanter. Some people call him the usurper, but I believe that it is, in fact, the other way around. I believe Esau was the usurper. Jacob is unquestionably an archetype of Christ. Remember that it was that Isaac. As was Isaac. Abraham sacrificing Isaac was a depiction of Christ, and then also Jacob. So it's signaling. It's a very clear signal that the Christ is coming through this family line. By the way, as soon as God told Abraham that the dragon slayer was coming through the line of Abraham, that gave the dragon a very targeted, a very narrow target. Where he could expend his time and energy trying to forestall the coming of Christ by focusing on the line of Abraham. And that's why Abraham and Israel become so important. The reason why Israel was so important was because it was going to deliver the Son of Man, the Christ, into the world, the Savior of mankind. And that's why the wars with Israel, and of course the giants in the land of Canaan, when the Israelites were coming into Canaan, when Joshua was coming into Canaan and conquering those lands, they were filled with giants. It's like my friend Elie Marsuli says, it was like a minefield of Nephilim that was laid to try and prohibit Joshua and the Israelites from coming in. So the dragon was targeting his efforts on the line of Abraham because he knew that that's who the Christ was coming from. And who's the Christ? The dragon slayer. He knows that this son of Adam, there's going to be a son of Adam born, and when that son of Adam is born, that person, that male child, is going to grow up and crush his head. Okay, that's his preoccupation, is to stop this from happening. Right. So, getting back to Jacob and Esau. So obviously, there's some chicanery happening here with this barrenness that the daughters of Abraham, the daughter-in-laws of Abraham, are experiencing. Is that coincidence? I don't think that's coincidence. I think that the dragon realized real quick, okay, one of these women sometime is going to give birth to this dragon slayer. So, so he was in both cases trying to produce an ill-begotten elder sibling. Why? And remember, in the first case that I cited here in the book with Isaac. Going all the way back to Cain, actually, but let's focus on the offspring of Abraham. So you're looking at Ishmael. Remember, the firstborn son of Abraham. Shouldn't the birthright have fallen to him? And it would have, except for the fact that Isaac was born. Miraculously, God brought this barren womb to life, and Isaac was born. And instead, the birthright was conferred rightfully to him. And being the not the son of a handmaiden, but being the son of Abraham's wife. That's why the birthright belonged to him. So that was an attempt by the dragon to usurp the birthright of Abraham, which was de facto the birthright by extension, the birthright of Adam, to usurp that birthright through Ishmael. Okay, so you see this playing out. And then you see it happen, of course, with Esau. Esau is more interesting because both Esau and Jacob were in Sarah's were in Rebecca's womb together. One of them looks like, a freaking Bigfoot, and the other one is smooth. I mean, you look, okay, I get it. You can have fraternal twins. That's what everybody says. What about fraternal twins? Okay, have you ever seen a fraternal twin that looks like a chimpanzee? The answer is no. Okay, no. And the chances that you're going to have the double phenomenon of being a twin and having hypertrichosis, werewolf syndrome, are you have a chance of probably winning the lottery 1,000 times in a row before you're going to be born as a twin with hypertrichosis. Now, maybe someone's going to go online and find a twin with hypertrichosis. I don't know. I highly doubt it. So something very strange is going on here. Again, I think that Esau is not entirely human. That's my opinion. There might be other interpretations, and you're welcome to them. But the point is that Jacob is a type of Christ. And what we're seeing here is an archetype of Christ, a foreshadow of Christ. What we're seeing play out here is what's going to happen at the end of the age, in my opinion, which is that at the end of the age, there's going to be this seed battle, as people call it, is going to come to a head. And you're going to have, I believe, I'll just cut to the chase. I believe that the dragon is going to, mirroring what happened in Genesis 6, I believe that the dragon is going to produce his own male son with a human woman somehow. Mm-hmm. Okay, either direct copulation, coitus, in other words, or some other means. Okay, he's going to create his own son. He's going to procreate, I should say, his own hybrid son, his own half-breed son, human enough. Now, we didn't talk about this. We could later on, maybe in another installment of this interview, human enough to receive the human birthright. Mm. And that is a big piece of the puzzle of what happened in Genesis 6, okay? I talk about that in my book. It's a big piece of the puzzle, which people do not contemplate. I laid out in the book. So a hybrid can be human enough, in my opinion. And I believe it's clear what happened, that this actually happened in Genesis 6. Human enough to claim, to inherit the human birthright and to take dominion of the earth legally, okay?
Right.
Remember that of the Antichrist, it is said of this person who we call the Antichrist, it is said that he is allowed to rule. And some people say it's 3.5 years and other people dispute it. Let's just say he's allowed. It says permitted, allowed to rule for a short time. Why is he permitted to rule? Because he has the right to rule. Because he's human enough to claim the birthright of Adam. Just like is the dragon's attempting to do here with so here's the precedent with Ishmael and Esau, attempting to usurp the birthright in the line of Abraham, take dominion, and destroy the line of Christ, doing that. And at the end of the age, Christ is already born. So now the game is usurpation of human dominion on planet Earth. Why? Why usurpation of human dominion? If you remember, we said that you have to have two things in order to successfully govern the earth, or govern as a region anywhere. You have to have the seal, that certificate with the seal of the king's authority, which we have right here. We're wearing it. And you have to have, together with that, you have to have the enforcement of the armies of the kingdom. The armies of the kingdom have to enforce your authority, or your authority is meaningless. It doesn't have any teeth. Thank God that the armies of the kingdom do enforce our authority. Actively, by the way, actively enforce our authority. Keep the devil in check. By the way, I believe that is the restrainer. I believe that the restrainer is Michael and the armies of heaven, restraining the dragon, restraining the devil and the insurgency on earth from usurping our birthright, the dominion of the earth, and having their way with us. Now, I know a lot of you are going to say that the devil owns the earth and blah, blah, blah. The answer is no, he doesn't. And I explain that in great detail why that's the case, why he does not. And I use the encounter that Jesus has with him in the desert of Judea to demonstrate where the devil got his authority from. Hint, he got it from us, and how he got that authority, and I work out all those principles in the book so that you can understand why you can understand that unquestionably the human species, the sons and daughters of Adam, we retain dominion of the earth until we become non-human. And at that point, the restrainer is going to lift his hand. Why? Because we no longer have the seal of authority. So once we forfeit our birthright, there's nothing to defend anymore. There's no reason to defend us anymore. We're not the offspring of Adam anymore. And so they're not going to defend our dominion. And literally all hell breaks loose, quite literally if you read the book of Revelation. And that's why all hell breaks loose, and that's why the Antichrist is permitted to rule. So, and there's a lot of little details in there, but the point is, and I always tell people when I'm doing these interviews, I always give away the because it's too important not to. I always give away the punchline, and the punchline is this: just as Esau was moving through the birth canal, Jacob reached up and grabbed his heel. That is exactly what Jesus is going to do at the end of the age, as this man of sin, who I believe is going to be named Apollo, and is going to be the son of the dragon with a human woman, just as he is usurping the throne of Christ that belongs to the Son of Man, taking dominion of the earth and creating a hellish dystopia on planet Earth, subjugating everybody to him. I think it's going to be mainly posthumans anyway in his kingdom, but those persecuting those humans that are left, most of those are going to be believers in Christ, because I think they're going to understand these principles, frankly. And just as all hope looks like it's lost, Jacob reaches up and grabs Esau's heel, and I illustrate that in a very particular a passage from Revelation, which I don't know that I have any more time to read that. So,
well, hey, get the folks to read the book, and yeah, I think what you laid out in this book, like I said, it's a 101, and I know this conversation we kind of jumped from topic to topic, but in the book you do it uniform, chapter after chapter, and you connect the dots. And I really do think, there was some chat, people saying, "Oh, this is Mormonism and all this kind of stuff." I actually think it solves some of those heresies. You look at all these different religions, and they have parts of stuff, but then they take it into a whole different direction. But I think this kind of information.
So you guys broke up for a minute. I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, I was just basically saying that this type of your book, basically, there's somebody in the chat saying that this is Mormonism, or that this is, some other heretical thing.
Not by any stretch of the imagination.
And I was saying it solves some of that. It helps resolve those issues rather than affirms it.
And to be fair to much of the chat, you're blowing minds, and you've got a lot of fans, Tim, too.
Yeah.
I want to just tell you about the angry ones.
I see the same accusations all the time: New Age, Mormonism, and some of the other ones that are rehashed. But I mean, anybody who knows what Mormonism is knows that this is not Mormonism. We're not going to, we're not aspiring to become gods and have planets and blah, blah, blah. It's not any of that. I don't subscribe to the teachings of Moriah and the Book of Mormon. I reject it wholeheartedly. I subscribe to the gospel of Christ, the narrative of Scripture, period.
There you go. Amen. Well, hey, everybody, make sure to head to timothyalberino.com. You can check out where do you want people to go? Can they? Well, you're not on Twitter anymore. What do you think? Where can people find your stuff?
I have a mailing list. That's the best way for people to stay connected with me, because it's mine. It's my mailing list, and the big tech can't get at it. So. From time to time, I'll post something on there. Or certainly, if whatever I'm doing, like interviews, I'll post on that mailing list and kind of let people know. You can sign up now. Right now, and I've been too lazy to go and change this, but on my website, you can sign up for my mailing list. It's way at the bottom by the contact. There's no button for it. It's very confusing. I apologize. Go all the way down to the contact form, and you'll see it down there next to the contact form. You can sign up for my mailing list. That's the best way to stay in contact with me on my website, which is my name, timothyalberino.com. And then, I also have a YouTube channel, which I had a YouTube channel and they took it away. They deleted it. And then I had another YouTube channel with another name, and I just simply changed the name of that YouTube channel back to my name. And so far they haven't deleted it. So, I have only published one thing on there since I changed to my name. But you can kind of pop in there every now and again. I'm thinking about reprising the Alberino analysis. Not sure, but I am working on a film project. As I said earlier, television project. So there'll be news about that soon enough. And I do plan on writing other books. So so if you're interested in this stuff, follow me sign up for my mailing list and keep an eye out for me on YouTube. And if I join any other platform, I am on Parler, but not too much activity going on over there right now for me. So
yeah, actually, during the show, there was an update where Apple gave Parler an ultimatum where they either start moderating all of their conservative content or they get kicked off the App Store. So who knows where Parler will be in 24 hours.
And that's on the heels of Twitter permanently banning Donald Trump. It wasn't just a suspension. It was a permanent ban of Donald Trump on Twitter. Just to timestamp everything
today.
Yeah, stuff going down.
It's going to get bad. It's going to get bad.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Timothy Alberino, thank you so much for coming back on the show, man. Let's not wait 5 years to get you back on again.
And let me say, those people, and I'm not upset with them. It is a little bit agitating, but I'm truly not upset. I can understand how people can hear me talk and hear concepts, bits and pieces of very complex subjects, and think, oh, this guy's a New Ager, this guy's a Mormon, whatever. If you think that, please buy my book and read it, because I guarantee you, you will not think that if you read my book from beginning to end.
I suggest the same thing. That's the Timothy Alberino guarantee, everybody. Oh, well, that's good. All right, buddy. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And again, everybody, head to timothyalberino.com, join the mailing list, find his YouTube, and on Parler. If it exists in 24 hours, you can find him there.
And guys, we did almost 3 hours and we didn't even talk about aliens, so you're gonna have to have me back.
That's incredible. I know we got to do a whole nother 3 hours.
Got to talk about the aliens because the real offensive stuff hasn't even we didn't even touch it because it's got to do with the aliens. So
I like it, man. Let's not wait so long. I like making YouTube mad. This is a good time. All right, Tim. Well, we will talk to you again soon. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers, whether you're listening on the podcast or viewing live on the internets. We're so happy you're here. And make sure to tune back in. Gons, do you have any last words?
No, just thank you guys for being here, all the people live, or if you're listening later, thank you so much. And go get Tim's book. I am endorsing it. If you have any questions about any of the material I've covered over the years, Tim does a good job. Again, it's like a 101. Some of my content might make a lot more sense if you read Tim's book. If you're confused,
I don't know if it's a 101, but
well, maybe a 201. But I think when you read it, it feels like more of a 101. He doesn't. It's just more clear. One point at a time. We jumped around in this conversation.
Clearer than you.
Yeah, we did jump around. By the way, you can get on Amazon. That's the only place it's being sold. And, I'm not shipping books myself, so that's my only option. That's where it's being sold, on Amazon.
I've seen many notes in the chat already that you've made some sales during the show. So there you go. I'll send you an address for our fees. Well, thank you, everybody. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. I just want to thank you guys too for having me on. It was really a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, you bet, dude. And I'm serious. Let's get you back on sooner this time. This 5-year schedule is not working out for me.
Yeah, in 5 years, none of us is going to be on the internet.
Yeah. Who knows? We'll all be in a bunker somewhere hiding in the desert.
Hiding from the commies.
Unless the internet fork that some folks are planning works out. I could tell you about that. Oh,
Gons, you and your cryptic, futuristic nonsense. All right, everybody. Make sure. Now, here's another thing for the live viewers. Remember, all these, not only do these videos live on the YouTube channels that you're watching, if you're on the Face Like the Sun channel, remember to do a little search and follow the Canary Cry Radio YouTube channel, as well as subscribing to us on your favorite podcast platform. There's lots of ways to find stuff we do, and I guarantee there's a lot more material where this came from. And remember, we'll be back with Canary Cry News Talk on Monday, the 11th of January. So make sure to tune back in. All right, folks, thanks for listening to this episode of Canary Cry Radio. Make sure to tune in next time. But until then, think outside the cage.
You can't handle the truth.